tired of compliance talks that put you to sleep? We've got you covered. No slides, no fluff, just real-world insights from two compliance pros with over 50 years of experience. Stay ahead, stay informed, and stay entertained. This is compliance without the boring bits.
Welcome everybody to Compliance Without the Boring Bits, session number 2. My name is Marcus Hornberg. I'm Senior Vice President Global Compliance at Basware. And I'm joined here by my good colleague and friend,
Gustav Grospelius, joining from our headquarters in Finland, where I work as a compliance and e-invoicing advisor. Though I actually changed my LinkedIn now to say connoisseur. I think that's more appropriate.
and the guy who actually does reports from an ice lake, if you're interested. But then again, that's what makes compliance less boring if someone reports on things from an ice lake. Yeah, what's happened since the last time? Obviously, I've been in Dubai, traveling around the Middle East, another region that is known for implementing e-invoicing mandates. And while that is boring, I'll try to cover it by riding a jet ski. First time in my life, was actually a lot of fun. And also drove a quad through the desert, which was equally funny, although a little bit more dusty than the first part. Gustav, what have you been up to?
So not the boring part there. No, in terms of the ice lake, the family and I, we went to Eastern Finland, to Joensuu, and of course I did the sauna and I did the ice lake swimming there. Avanto, as we call it here in Finland. Can't do without that. But in terms of compliance, I held a really useful webinar to our existing customers earlier this week, where we talked about what's going on in Germany and what's going on in Belgium. And I think something that struck me there was how many questions are we still receiving about the mandate in Germany, even though it is in place already?
Yeah.
And as well, the whole difference into how Germany and Belgium have implemented their e-invoicing mandates in a different way in terms of communication, where Germany basically says, this is the law, follow it. And Belgium says, this is the law, but here's an FAQ, here are instructions, and here is financial support if you need it to implement the mandates. Or what do you think, Marcus?
There are fundamental differences in how governments approach these kinds of things. I mean, in the end, you would argue they all want the same thing, right? They all want to modernize their processes. But the one thing that most of them really neglect is the communication part, which is obviously why we're here. And we want to make sure that everyone starts to understand that compliance is not necessarily always something to be afraid of. Certainly is nothing to be boring, which is why I just want to really make sure that you see these signs every time we point those at each other means that we are starting to sound as boring as some of those governments are when they're conveying their messages. So we want to make sure that you're having fun listening to this, and you're also getting some more information that is hands-on. And that's our objective with this little episode here. And Gustav, I think we're off to a good start. So why don't we go into the actual real life cases?
Let's do.
Perfect. So real life cases, last time we spoke about archiving, and we promised that we would use the next episode, which is apparently this one, to talk a little bit more about archiving and how it relates to the overall topic of electronic invoicing and invoice digitization and what needs to be happening here. And I'm really excited that Gustav has some hands-on and practical insights into this topic. So Gustav, why don't you tell us what you've experienced?
So I see a lot of the businesses I talk to start waking up about archiving. And I think me as well, really, really focusing more on the archiving topic, realizing more and more all the things needed for it. And like I have had businesses ask me, is our OCR tool enough for compliant archiving? Or is our AP processing tool enough for compliant archiving? And the analogy I usually use then is that, you have your AP tool, you have that is your desk, your workbench that you work on. And then you have your filing cabinet in the basement that you run down to every now and then and put stuff in. That is the archive. Your working desk is not your legally compliant archive because papers on your desk will get lost, you'll spill coffee on them and whatnot. And the same goes in the AP tool, right? You're going to have invoices that get modified, get deleted, or what have you. And they're not really, no, that's not a compliant. Okay, sorry, I went too boring there.
I see someone just pouring a cup of coffee over their computer and actually worrying about where are my invoices, are they being affected? No, but one of the things really that I would like you to just lose a few words on is how do customers now deal with the variety of invoices that they need to archive? Is there stuff that you're seeing as well?
Yes, I think the challenge there is something that you and I have spoken a lot about, Marcus, is what is the legal tax object to be archived? That is something that is difficult to determine first, and suppliers are not making it easy for buyers. I believe last time as well we spoke about what about when you receive duplicate invoices. And again, here, Belgium is a good example. They say very straightforward, if you receive duplicate invoice, the invoice is the one that counts as the legal tax object. Um, I know, Marcus, you have a lot of experience as well doing auditing and so on for archiving solutions.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on common mistakes?
See, I think the biggest issue now is we've seen 25 years of invoice digitization, really, but we've not really seen people standardizing this process and being prepared, right? So the one thing that you and I keep repeating is get on top of the developments and really create a new process for yourself so that you're prepared for all these changes. And one of the biggest issues that I see now is that most businesses really struggle with the fact that archiving laws are not e-invoicing laws, right? Archiving laws are also not global, right? Archiving laws are national laws. And that means if you're a multinational organization, you need to have various different processes to respond to varying national archiving requirements. And that is where I see the biggest gaps. And then if you drill one level deeper down, and I know this is probably going to become very boring now, or maybe not, because the one thing is, if you don't tell and talk to your suppliers, right? And that's again the communication part that I am missing so much from all these projects. Why don't people sit down and talk about the requirements? Because one thing is for sure, if you don't tell your suppliers what you're expecting from them, then do not expect the invoices that are coming into your environment to be sort of streamlined and standardized. And that has the biggest impact on archiving, because then to identify what do I need to archive? Which is the legal object, right? Where has it come from? To ensure these things like integrity of data, authenticity of origin. If I don't have the preparations in place, then I don't have to wonder that downstream my archiving processes will fail. And that has bad ramifications and repercussions during audits. And that's my experience, what customers are actually and what clients and taxpayers in the global marketplace are now actually struggling with.
All right,
And
trying
just,
to keep this
yeah.
on a non-boring level now, but touching upon what you just said. So you talked about, making sure that you get the correct invoice from the get-go and the
Yeah.
correct data. And then you said authenticity. So explain to us, what is authenticity in terms of archiving?
So authenticity of origin means you need to know where it has come from. Because by definition, you should not pay an invoice that you have not vetted against the supplier's identity, right? An invoice essentially is a request for payment, and it needs to be issued because of an actual supply of goods or services. If that is not something that you have dealt with before paying it, then you have a gap in your audit trail. And that's a big issue.
And then on top of that, you would need integrity as well, right? After you received it, to have the integrity throughout. So talk about that one.
But that is again something that people struggle to understand. Integrity of data means not just during transmission from point A to point B, also across the entire retention period, which can vary really, right? Some people think, oh, I only have to retain invoices for X years, right? In different invoice scenarios, the retention period can be quite significantly longer. Like, for example, when invoices relate to real estate, then those invoices need to be retained for the duration of the life cycle of the building, for example. And so all these things need to be taken into consideration, and a proper archiving process plus a proper archiving product need to back this up. If you don't have this, it's a problem.
For people being used to paper invoices, the integrity is pretty easy. You could put a stamp on it, or whatever, and put the paper in a box and then say this has never been opened. How does that work for an e-invoice or a PDF invoice?
Oh, that's one of the things, and it throws me back to, I think it was back in the days 2011, 12. I don't remember exactly, when there was this equal treatment directive in the EU. All of a sudden, someone issued this directive saying digital signatures are no longer required, and in order to ensure integrity of data and authenticity of origin, you may use business controls. And that's very equal to what you just described earlier with the mandates that are coming out, that are not being accompanied by proper communication, leaving the taxpayers in the dark. So essentially, someone had this brilliant idea to do away with this very quick and straightforward approach to use a digital signature, to put a secure envelope around an invoice with a digital signature related to a root certificate valid for 100 years, where at any given point in time, an auditor could come, click a button and say, okay, I've validated this one has not been tampered with, even after years, right? That would have been so easy. So how do you do this now? Through business controls. And that is where, again, the loop closes when it comes to the variety of different invoice types, paper originated invoices, PDF invoices, XML invoices, and now the government issued invoices. Hey, that's an issue, right? Because some of the taxpayers now believe if I have to, for example, clear my invoices with the government, and the governments aren't clear about not being the ones that will archive those invoices, then what? What is going
But
to
then
happen?
there are governments as well who say they will archive. I believe Poland is saying that they will archive the invoices in the portal.
They will
So isn't
say
that
that.
a really easy solution for businesses?
I think if there is one lesson to be learned, then do not trust the capabilities that governments are stipulating in public, because at one point they might turn around, find out that they have probably promised a bit too much, and then you're going to be on the back foot because they will say, we never let you go, right? We never released you from the obligation to archive, so you should have archived,
And
right?
this
So
touches upon then, in terms of legibility and accessibility to invoice as well,
absolutely,
that is needed.
absolutely. My recommendation to everyone listening would always be keep an archive yourself. Do make sure that you're documented, and that regardless what the law might say, do not rely on it to be of absolute truth. The thing is really, you're a taxpayer, and I think you should make sure that your filing cabinet is up to date, and everything that you need to prove to someone outside that you've done the right thing is really for you. And I think that's the most important thing. So regardless, because we've also seen those government mandates change. France was a good example, right? From a clearance system, moved to what I think is not really a clearance system. Belgium is not going to have a clearance system. So if you're dealing with archiving requirements across multiple jurisdictions, implement a standardized process as much as you can and make sure that you're documented. That's my recommendation.
But there are still more considerations where you store the invoices as well, right? Many countries say that the invoices have to be stored within its own borders,
No,
um,
absolutely.
or
Absolutely.
that you have to preserve the original formats and
Yeah.
so on. Mm.
I think archiving in itself is a product in its own right. It's a process in its own right. It's compliance with bookkeeping legislation, and it's very complex, which is why I would also always recommend to find a provider. Do not try to build this yourself. There are services out there that are providing these kinds of services and products, and I think that would be the best way forward, so that you can actually work in peace. Because
This has
everything
me
else
thinking.
is
Yeah,
just
sorry for
difficult.
interrupt you. Did you ever
Oh,
meet, like we meet AP managers, AR managers, indirect tax managers? Did you ever meet an archiving manager?
oh, indeed, I have, but that might be because of who I am and that I've been working in audits for a long time. But yeah, little do people know there are actually responsible people inside tax-paying organizations that are solely authorized to manage the archive, right?
Mm.
And that is something that is very important. It's also part of the process documentation that needs to be put in front of the administrations, the tax administrations, so that they understand how do you actually retain your business documents. And that is not excluding the US, by the way, because anyone listening from the US thinking, oh, that doesn't apply to me, look into SOX, look into everything else that exists in your country. You also need to archive your business documents in line with applicable legislation. And that is not just something that is limited to Europe or Asia. It affects the US and the rest of the Americas as much.
What about the process steps, Marcus? Like in terms of who approved the invoice, what was the purchase order, how was it paid, and so on.
Yeah,
What
I
about
think that
archive for
is
those?
where it becomes really boring because you're now going into process documentation, really. But good point, Gustav. Thank you for raising it. In the event that someone is interested who's listening to this webcast, please come back to us and ask very detailed questions around these particulars that you need to observe when it comes to what needs to be archived, and we can help you understand those details. But I think for now we're through with this part and we should move over to the hot gossip action.
Yes, let's move over to hot gossip.
So, Gustav, hot gossip. What's on your side? I mean, we've seen quite some fundamental changes in the previous section. You were talking about governments, right? So we've already gotten a flavor of what happens if governments are influencing and impacting what our listeners are interested in. So what about your most recent experience? Tell us something.
Well, I think what's on a lot of people's mind right now as we record this in the beginning of March is really what's going on in the USA. What's going on with the tariffs? How much can we trust our supply chain, and so on. What are your thoughts, Marcus?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, if you just look at some of the headlines that doubtlessly everyone has seen, abolishment of the IRS. I mean, that's effectively making no further use of what used to be your tax administration, your finance administration, right? And introducing tariffs rather than VAT, not fully understanding VAT and how it works. I think there are some challenges ahead of us. My personal viewpoint is that regardless of what is going to happen, invoicing will remain the source of information. We will see disruptions of supply chains. I mean, you've mentioned a very interesting example earlier. Maybe you want to talk to us about cars and Mexico and US. Maybe.
Well, yeah, that is what I read earlier today. That's the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. They're so integrated as countries. So a car part will cross a border 7 times before it gets into the actual car being built in the US. So imagine 7 times, and each time you have a tariff added. So imagine that to the supply chain, to the extra cost, to the extra administrative work needed there.
That
And
car is going to become expensive, right? I just realized that the BMW I have in front of my house is actually not built in Germany. It's built in the US. So I'm wondering what is going to happen to that one.
all right. Well, I think now with the tariffs coming and you're talking about, abolishment of IRS, what impact will that have on invoicing? I think we won't see any kind of controls or government portals in the US, but the data must still be there for them to collect, well, for them to see that you have the correct tariffs, the correct taxes collected, and so on. And when you and I was talking earlier, I was speculating even that can even US be the first government to implement not a domestic clearance mandate, but a cross-border clearance mandate, where they only want to be in control of the invoices flowing across the border to see the tariffs.
Could as well be. I mean, what we've seen in the past already, there are customs services and platforms that are being implemented to digitize the customs process. I think we've already alluded last time to the potential of invoices, and particularly electronic invoices, to replace customs documents. Might as well see something like that, because if you want to assess your tariffs on the in and export of goods into and out of your country, then maybe that is going to be one of the conduits to it. Who knows? It's very difficult because there is a difference between throwing headlines out into the market and having a strategy. And quite frankly, right now, I am probably inclined to say, and maybe I'm a bit overboard here with my assessment, but I don't necessarily think that there is a strategy in place already
Mm.
to
We don't
replace what
see
is already existing.
we don't get much warning when for example the tariffs will happen and so on. And so I think the impact for our businesses is that they need to have everything in place today and be agile. And that's very easy for you and I to sit here and talk about
Oh,
that. I just had a customer who was a business I was talking to earlier today, and I was talking about getting ready for the mandates and shit. But Gustav, you don't understand. It's an elephant. We have to get this elephant moving to
yeah,
do anything.
yeah.
So yeah, with that elephant analogy, make sure that the elephant is moving already, and yeah, it's very easy to say for us. With tariffs being put in place only with a few days or weeks notice, or
Who knows? I mean, the thing is, really, I mean, if they're talking about an elephant, then I'm talking about the Titanic. Electronic invoicing being the Titanic, we know that the first legislation's been here for 26 years, almost 27 years. So the problem really is this has to move into one direction. We see that it's moving straight forward, and it's very difficult to make some deviations. We've seen different approaches in different parts of the world to this one. So I think some governments were trying the sledgehammer method. Some governments were more reluctant and laid back with their approach. Whether or not anything was more successful than the other still waits to be seen. But I think for our customers and for our listeners, the one thing is still there, and that is be prepared. Yes, make sure that you're not waiting for the elephant to move. Try to find means to move that elephant and get it going, so that you are actually prepared for what is to come.
and then, for example, having centralized processes, being
Oh
having
yeah,
centralized providers, having everything centralized, so you are able to get a visibility and view. You know your whole supply chain. You know all the invoices going back and forth. So you know when something happens, that these are the parts of my process that touches the
they
new
absolutely are.
regulations.
Absolutely. And the quicker you get clarity over your global infrastructure and architecture, I think that's the biggest problem, particularly when it comes to those global businesses. Most of them really don't fully understand the magnitude of the project. They're not even aware of how many different systems they are operating today. But what we are certainly seeing at this very moment is a consolidation of systems and approaches. And I think what needs to happen is that this is being sped up, so that you have less things to control and a more agile approach to adapting to changing environments. And that is only going to get worse. It's not going to get easier. Okay.
Good. Let's move on. Let's move on to our tips section. What do you say, Marcus?
I think tips are a good idea.
So you and I, we thought we'll cover Singapore a bit, because Singapore is changing as well. And now let's see how long I can do this without Marcus raising the boring sign. But Singapore today is using PayPal a lot. And PayPal, as a very quick reminder, PayPal is three things. That's how I explain it. One, it's a cooperation between us invoicing providers, so you can send and receive invoices no matter who you use. I'm starting to speak fast now because I see you're holding the sign, Marcus. One, it is the definition of the whole P2P procedure. You know, what documents are included there: catalogs, orders, order rejection, invoice, credit note, and so on. And lastly, it's a format definition. What are the actual data formats for those documents? And Singapore has its own brand version of PayPal called Invoice Now, and their own format. But there's no invoicing mandate right now in Singapore. It's coming, and I see you moving, Marcus. It's coming November this year, November 25, with some changes. And what's happening then is that invoicing is mandatory for certain businesses, mandatory through the PayPal network, but also real-time reporting to the tax authorities. And the interesting thing here is that I was talking to a business, and I was saying, well, you don't have to take any action yet, because the mandate will kick in for you only then and then later. And they said, no, but we were invited. And an invitation, Gustav, that means we have to start. It's not a real invitation like you go to a party. An invitation means now it's time to go.
Now it's time to go. And I think I will not put this up, but the one thing that I would like to just stress is PayPal is just another technicality, right? Keep that in mind. You're a taxpayer. PayPal doesn't solve your problems, right? You're a business. And my tip is, if there is someone boasting out and pushing out PayPal as a requirement, find a service provider to do it for you, because why would you actually sort this out? It's a transport mechanism, by all means. That's what it is, right? It's a conduit for governments to do what they want to do when it comes to their to their process digitization. Australia has gone down this road and have seen some success in this area. The one thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't do the business optimization part. You will still need a proper service provider who understands how invoice processing needs to be done from your perspective, right? Governments, that is a quick reminder to everyone. Governments do not care about business process optimization. Governments have their own agenda. Governments want to increase the collection of taxes, and that is what they are up to. And whatever means they use to do this should be something that you deal with, but do it through a service provider. You don't want to set up a massive department of people that are monitoring these things, that are doing all the technical setup and everything else, because the one thing you want to do is you want to automate your processes, and you want to make sure that you can process all those invoices in as little time as possible and pay them in as little time as possible, hopefully. I mean, you don't want to extend all those payment terms, right? But that is what you want to focus on. Yeah. And then let the rest be done by a service provider who can make sure that the data comes through. Hey, come on, that wasn't boring.
Just so I can, no, that's because I want to say something. I would use and liken this to, as a business, you need an internet provider to get on the internet. You wouldn't set up your own hardware connection, everything to the internet. You would just get a provider and then have all the messages there, and then I can work for it. And it's the same thing with PayPal. PayPal will just deliver the messages or take your messages, but you need to work with everything that happens before you send them or after you receive them, the invoices, right?
Hey, so maybe. So I'm on my way to Brussels, where I'm going to meet actually with PayPal tomorrow. So maybe next time I'll report back as to what this whole thing means, and we will give you some more insights, and you can actually make a more informed decision about your strategy when someone puts the magic word PayPal in front of you and suggests that it solves all your problems in one go. Is it time for wrap up?
Well, I would just like, in terms of solving all our problems, PayPal is active in more than 40 countries, but you will not have a 100% reach even in those countries through PayPal. No. And Belgium is now managing the use almost through PayPal, but still you cannot expect 100% coverage. So no, PayPal is not the answer. It is absolutely, what would I call it? Like an oil helping your gears turn, right? But it's not, it's not the engine.
No, and it doesn't actually deliver your strategy, right? The strategy you need to set up yourself. You're a buyer, you're a supplier, you need to work with your trading partner. This is the most important message that you need to observe, right? Whether there's something like PayPal in between doesn't make a difference. What you need is accuracy of content of data. That is what makes your process work. And that's far better of an oiling than anything else for your engine, right? Accuracy and completeness of data. Great. Time to wrap up.
Let's. We spoke about Belgium and Germany, different styles of communication. We spoke at length about archiving and the various aspects you need to consider. And I'm afraid there was not a one-like solution. This is how you do archiving. It's more complex than that.
It definitely is. We also spoke about strategies, right? Be prepared.
That's the one word we always say, be prepared.
We always say that. That's
but it's so easy for us to sit here behind the screen and say, be prepared.
No, most definitely. And I think, I look forward to the next compliance without the boring bits piece, because I think we have a lot to say about all those items and topics that no one wants to address because they are more difficult and not necessarily spring to the eye in the beginning. And everyone talking about government mandates because that's their strong point to talk is obviously also not going to be very interesting. So let's focus on those parts and see that we are delivering some more interesting snippets about that in our next session.
Sure, and do make sure to sign up for that next one using the link.
And that's a wrap for today. Thank you very much for joining.
And thank you for listening until this. I very much appreciate it. Sorry for interrupting you, Marcus, again.
I hope your coffee is not cold by now. See you next time.
See you.
And that's a wrap. Thank you. Join us again next quarter for compliance without the boring bits.